Hi, welcome to Aspire Europe Limited's video series. This one talks about business change management. Hi, I'm Rod Sowden, Managing Director of Aspire Europe and lead author for Managing Successful Programs and P3M3. And today in this session, we're going to talk about organisational change models and roles within the organisation. Now, one thing that's worth bearing in mind before we get going is that change is difficult. And I've always loved this quote from Petronius Arbiter from centuries ago, where he was a general in the Greek army and made this observation that whenever you're faced with a challenge, they tend to reorganize. And one of the problems with reorganization is that actually you may not actually be better than you were before the reorganization. However, it does create an illusion of progress. Quite often, though, it actually causes more confusion and we become less efficient. So this is not a modern phenomenon driven by the massive changes in our digital age, because it's been around since Greek and Roman times. Okay, so we're living in a highly complex world, and these are words that you'll no doubt think about and see and hear. Strategic analysis, seeing the bigger picture, having plans, mission statements, vision statements. We're covering it all in these courses. One of the problems is that we are living in a highly volatile world nowadays. We've seen that with COVID, we've seen that with all sorts of the growth of Amazon and the growth of digital systems and smartphones. So there's a lot of volatility around. So we have this acronym VUCA, which is worth putting in your notebook to remember for the future. And basically what that's saying is whatever we try and do, we've got to cope with the volatility around us, which would really be in the marketplace. Uncertainty. The world is changing politically and economically so quickly, and also with climate issues, that we really can't plan for 10 years that well, and it's complex. Its interactivities are quite often unchecked. And so therefore we need to try to understand the soft systems, whether it's in your organization, whether it's in our world, and where are the influences coming from. It's 2021 at the moment. 15 years ago, we would never have dreamed that the most influential thing in our world would be our smartphones, but we take it for granted today. But we're still looking to work out how to control these things. And of course, we've got ambiguity. Yeah, in amongst all that sort of stuff, how do you make a decision about where you're going to go? Yeah, because we just don't know what else is going to change at any moment in time. So within that context, we have to try and set direction. So we can only really see as far as the planning horizon that's certain. So how does change come about and how do we cope with it? So first of all, we've got the chaos theory, which is change isn't really planned, it just happens unexpectedly. And I suppose for the last couple of years, we've had the most graphic illustration of this with the impact of COVID. We still don't know where it came from, those kind of evolutionary connections, where they were made, and then what happened, and then how different parts of the world reacted to it, and different industries, different economies reacted to unpredictable events. Within our organization, it's not unusual for change to happen because some senior manager was in a mood about something and says it needs to change, and the next thing it kicks off a whole load of other things. If we look at it from the UK perspective, when Brexit was coming, the completely unconnected to Brexit was, of course, the problems in Syria, and on the media you had all the refugees marching across Europe. There was how much did that factor into the average British person's decision to vote to leave the EU, just so that these refugees wouldn't come to the UK, or that's what they thought. So you see there's all these soft decisions going on in the world that lead us to unexpected consequences, which is a really important thing. Yeah, decisions made to make a change, rarely are the consequences fully understood, which is why so much change fails. And then we'll think about different types of organizations. So we've got complex adaptive organizations. Yeah, in any organization, to make change effective, we need to have a whole infrastructure of agents supporting us, because organizations are complex. They were rather like societies in themselves, and there's numerous soft systems and relationships that need to work together. You think by the time senior managers get up into their sort of 40s and 50s, you think about the friendships that have been established across organizations. Those friendships are needed across the senior management layer to actually make things happen. Yeah, so it's not about just do it. We have to convince the organization that it's worth it. And the first layer is to get the senior and middle management on board. Now, we have different terms for this. I kind of tend to call it middle management permafrost. When you're trying to implement change, senior managers just get on with their day job and don't address their responsibilities to lead change. And we'll talk about change agents in a minute. And then we've got the kind of more reactive systems. So the system sits there waiting for things to happen. Now, just like our society does, society is changing because of the arrival of things like smartphones and portable digital tools. That's driving change in our society. We don't really know how to control it, but we need to understand that in an organization, the same kind of things happen. People relate to each other, but we need to understand the impact of those reactions and how they're managed, and also understanding what the kind of values and systems that are being used. If a change is challenging an organization's core values, then that's really complex. And we need to think about what's the implication of that. What are the symbols that support those values? What are the behaviors that support them? So we need to find ways to manage that stuff. So that's how change happens, which is the chaos theory, but it can also be why change doesn't happen, because whether they're adaptive or whether they're reactive will depend on how we need to manage the change through that organization. So let's think about this common steps in change. So once again, we're looking back in history at Machiavelli and this wonderful quote that's outlining that delivering any sort of change or changing the status quo is a perilous occupation. And we've already talked about that a little bit in the adaptive versus reactive organizations. But change fails because they don't take in the whole picture. However, let's just look at some of the steps that we'd expect to see in a change life cycle. So where does the idea begin? Yeah, this is your chaos factor. Is it two people in a pub? Is it people reading something in the press that suddenly triggers some, but somebody's going to have an idea that something needs to happen. And then we have to find a way of spreading it. Now, if you've got an idea and you want to make change happen, then you need to get people to support you. Now, in another video, we talk about Kotler and his 8 steps. Well, actually, spreading the idea is basically getting a guiding coalition to support you. Yeah. Once you've got that idea spread, then you're looking for somebody at a higher level to put their weight behind it. And this is where our sponsor comes in. The more senior the sponsorship, the more likely it is to succeed. If you've got a junior sponsor with little authority, you've got less chance of progress. But then again, it depends how big the change is. And then we need to work about the impact of this. We need to work with the line managers in operations and reconcile how would this change work with BAU. Now, it may be that the idea is a great one. It just works in other organizations, but it might not work for you. Or you put your idea on ice until the time is right. So it doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It may just be it's the wrong time for that idea. We then need to convince, if we decide to go ahead, that the people who are affected by this accept the idea. And that's where the communication comes in. That's where all the hard work is. The acceptance of the change doesn't happen once it's in. It needs to happen before it arrives. And there are plenty of examples where people are concerned about implementing change when actually the people in BAU are very happy with it. Okay, so I'm just thinking of an example where we had to put a system in which required engineers to document what they were doing at a higher level of detail. Now, the initial reaction to that was, we don't want to be audited, we're professionals, we don't need this. Actually, once they got it in, they realized that by documenting things that they'd done or what they'd learnt, they could learn from each other, and it became a hugely successful implementation. Again, it was because we convinced them to use it. And then after that, the journey started again on that particular system because they came up with more and more ideas about how they could improve it. So that was one of my favourites about how we got people on board. Um, and there was some chaos theory kicking in there because what they saw in the system we hadn't necessarily seen when we were communicating it, but by having a effective training program, and the training was focused on getting them to accept it rather than how to use the system, because as engineers they were pretty bright people anyway. That's how we managed to progress it. Okay, just very quickly, here are the steps that we go through with change. So we need to identify it, which we've just talked about. We then need to have a plan, and then we need to deliver it. And then once we put it in, we need to embed it. Now, those steps overlay the cycle that I've just explained. So what we've, rather than a cycle, you can see the sequence of activities that happen. Now, if we look at it from a program perspective, we've got to look at, okay, where are we today? So that's what we call the as is state. And in those little boxes, we have process, organization, tools, and information. So process, how do we do things? Organization, who's involved, what skills do they have? T is for tools and technology. So what systems are working? How do they connect with each other? And the information that comes out of it, how does that work? How do we use that information? Where are the gaps? And then we can look at some steps. So we run some projects to implement new ways of working, or to design the capability, not implement, design the capability. So we might be updating our tools, or we might be updating or providing training. So we might have any number of interim steps where we improve these systems. Okay, that's how this works. So we have interim steps in program management where we call them tranches, and that would lead us to a future state. All right, so whenever we think it's going to end, um, and what will the process, working practices, organization tools, and information be at that end. And you can see there that we're running projects to build the capability. We then do transition, which delivers us the outcomes. And once we've got the outcomes in and things are stabilized, hopefully we'll be getting our benefits. To implement any change, we need to have a hierarchy and structure in place. We have kind of formalization of program and project structures, which we can have a look at in a minute. But let's firstly think about the change structure. There's lots of theories that highlight the need for this. Kotler about executive leadership, Senge's executive leader, various other ones like O'Neill's change agents and that kind of thing. So we need a hierarchy because one person can't do it, and the program project teams are around delivering capability. So let's start with the change sponsor. Now they only get they don't get their hands that dirty, all right, because they're about steering. You don't accept a captain of a ship to go and fix the engine. So they're accountable for the strategic change. Normally at the top of the organization, they may be on the board or actually accountable to the board. Below them, we have the kind of concept of the business change manager. This is the interface really between operations and change. They definitely get their hands dirty. They could well be heads of department, senior managers. These are the people who are going to have to actually make change happen. So if you're in a change that requires job cuts, it's them that's going to make it happen. If it's more staff, then they're going to be dealing with the recruitment. If they're reorganizing so people have different jobs, it's their organization, because at the end of the day, they own the outcomes. And then we've got the change leaders. Now they get very, very dirty, and they are the ones who would be the local line managers. Now, if they are not on board with this change, they can become the biggest resistors. So if they're not on board as leading change, it's almost guaranteed that we'll be on board as resisting change. So if you haven't got these guys on board, then you are definitely going to fail. And then we've got the great network of change advocates across the organization. These people are everywhere and they need to be believing in the way forward. So we need those hierarchy in place. And obviously, the further down you get that through that hierarchy, the more of them. But focusing on the change network, whether it's formal, informal change and how they're going to work, is absolutely essential for getting your change done. Now, if we look at the program delivery structure, it's a bit more formalized and a bit easier to recognize. So we've got the portfolio manager. Now, from the portfolio perspective, that's the entirety of the change in your organization. So this person would see the whole thing from the strategic level, and their job is to keep the coherence of the change. We've then got responsibilities for the coherent delivery of the capability. So we're talking about program managers here. They're working really closely with the business change managers to make sure that they get the capability from the projects. The projects are delivering business requirements. Yeah, they're creating outputs and things that people are going to use, the widgets and the whatnots, the kind of IT systems. That's what the project manager does. The program manager is delivering a number of them and make sure they all fit together. And then the project teams are doing the hard work. So that's how our program structures look. And we're kind of more familiar with them, I'm sure. Okay, well, we've covered a number of areas that talk about how we push change in and how organizations react. But Lewin's force field analysis is really interesting about how an organization lives in the status quo. So on the left-hand side, we have the driving forces for change, and on the right-hand side, we have the resisting forces. And at any moment in time, as an organization is stable, these are in equilibrium basically. So, yeah, if we look at the driving forces, the management board want it, but do they want it enough to upset everybody? Yeah, there might be some benefits in it, freeing up time for the individuals, opportunities for improving service and all that kind of stuff. On the other side of it, we've got customers who might want to walk away. So we've got these restraining forces that stop us making change happen. Quite often the amount of resources is going to be one of those, our capability, to move to a new way of working, and whether the market wants to come with us. And really quite a classic example of how forces sit in equilibrium was the UK during the preparation for Brexit. Just looking back to 2016 after the vote in the UK to leave, and this kind of relates to any vote in any country where you've kind of got a split. Um, there was a mandate to leave, obviously a very small majority. So what we had, the forces to change were basically the lead vote, which you couldn't argue with. The problems were there was only a minority of MPs in government that really wanted it to happen. And of course, we have the dark forces of the popular press wanting it to happen for some reason. And then there was an element of the political elite pushing it. And we have to remember there were other countries in Europe that voted to leave and never did, notably France, where the government just ignored the vote. So what happened in the UK then was we had a very strong forces to remain in the EU. So the EU negotiators were really did play hardball. That's why we have such a difficult deal. Manufacturing industry, supply chains were heavily vocal about the dangers of breaking up the supply chains. There were other industries, the food industry saying, well, how's this going to work? We had the EU government working to kind of make it more difficult for the UK to leave. Plus, we had our own parliament actually with a majority to stay in and the civil service and machinery of government were largely keen on either staying in or minimising the damage of leaving. So you had some very strong forces on the right to remain or to resist change against forces on the left that were trying to push the change. And we ended up in, 3 or 4 years of pretty much not having a government because they spent the whole time going on about this stuff. So the only way that was changed was a significant movement where the Conservative Party re-elected a new leader, went to the country and got a majority, and that majority gave them the power to leave. Because if we hadn't had that election, rightly or wrongly, we'd still be in this state. So you can see, therefore, that when you've got a force field analysis like that, holding something in place, something significant has to change. And in that case, the new Prime Minister or the old leader resigning, a new Prime Minister coming in and gaining a mandate from the country to leave. So there we go. That's probably the most practical example we can have of force field analysis in the modern world. Okay, well, thanks for your time. I hope that proved useful. I hope you go on to enjoy the rest of the course, and maybe we'll meet again on some of the other videos.